Sounds good.
Yeah, so hi. For anybody who is not familiar with me and my work and somehow ended up in this space or watching a replay later, I'm Samantha Zipporah, and I have been tending to the womb continuum for serving my own curiosity and serving my community for over 23 years. I started studying before I started to bleed. I knew that this was my job in the world before I had a concept of it being a job as part of capitalism. I started studying herbs and nutrition and midwifery at a very young age. I worked with Planned Parenthood for years. And I worked as a professional birth doula for a really long time as well. Almost the entirety of my 20s, I was on call for birth. I will share a little bit more about my lineage of learning in a little bit. And actually, before I introduce my dear friend here, Bonnie, I want to go ahead and just give a land acknowledgement. And we are on the land of the Arapaho and the Ute tribes originally, and also in the land of the bobcats and the deer and the bear and the bunnies and so many other creatures that we are humble guests here in this space, and acknowledging that this land is unceded territory. And yeah, giving gratitude for all of the amazing miracles that brought us to this exact moment that we get to share this moment and transmit this information with you. So thank you for being part of it. And Miss Bonnie.
Hi.
I'm so blessed to have my sister, my friend, my colleague, my comrade here, Bonnie. And please tell us whatever you feel comfortable sharing right now about,
Sure.
Like, how did you come to this work? What has your path been like? What's your lineage of study?
Yeah, so I've been pretty drawn to pregnancy release work, and I didn't really even know why. Eventually, over the years, it became clear that it was part of me healing my own inherited trauma, as well as my own sexual trauma, and really trying to, help support other people going through it. I went to an herbal school for an herbalism school here in the Denver area, and did their clinical herbalism and nutrition program in 2017. And I have just a small private herbal practice. I've been a birth doula, and then I was an abortion doula and still am an abortion doula with the Colorado Doula Project for a while, which is who we're going to be donating all the proceeds to.
And thank you so much. We've raised almost
Yes.
$1,000 to donate to this amazing nonprofit.
I'm so stoked. So yeah, should I talk about the CDP?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. So yeah, the CDP, I was an organizer for them for about 5 years, and they are a grassroots organization, all volunteer led, and they are explicitly anti-racist and trans affirming, which I've found in the doula world to be kind of few and far between.
And in the pro-choice, like abortion world, there's so much rhetoric of like woman's choice.
Yep, absolutely.
It's like people.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're amazing because their whole thing started off as wanting to provide a free abortion doula to anyone who requests that kind of support. And then just a little backstory, my best friend and I some years ago were living in a co-op, and hosting a lot of travelers from around the world on couchsurfing.com. And at one point we got this request from this woman in Turkey, and her message was like, hey, my sister and I are coming to Boulder to get a late term abortion. the sister was. And the person who was reaching out to us was acting as the translator. And she was like, you know, we've sent over 100 messages to people in the area. And I've been very explicit about, you know, what I'm coming for, because it's a week-long process. And we're trying to save money because the procedure itself costs $10,000. You know, I sold my car just to afford the plane tickets, blah, blah, blah. And my friend and I, being abortion, you know, doulas, and being so passionate about the work, we're like, oh my God, of course we'll host you. And we learned so much from that experience and realized, wow, there's such a need for some kind of like support network for people coming here, you know, for like logistical purposes, not just doula support. So then with the CDP, we made this, what's now called the Abortion Support Network. So you can go on their website and request, there's lots of little fields, you know, to fill out if you need a ride to and from the appointment, or a lot of it now is giving a ride. So they'll send someone to, you know, pick up the person from the airport.
You haven't shared what the acronym means.
Oh, excuse me. It's the Colorado Doula Project. Yeah, and we'll share their website too at some point, so you can check them out. But yeah, so that's who we're donating all the proceeds to. And we were getting a lot of, you know, out of state people before the Texas bill. And now, of course, that has only increased by quite a lot. So yeah, the other piece to this is if anyone wants to be a volunteer, they really could use some help. So we'll share more info about that too. But I wanted to just read a quick thing that Gina, one of the co-founders, said to me yesterday. She said, we had a Texas client a few days ago, a young college student who emailed us for support. She was very early in pregnancy, but had to fly here to get a medication abortion. She only received partial financial aid, so she was saving every dollar. Her plan was to sleep in the airport after she received the medication because she couldn't afford a hotel room. We had a doula pick her up from the airport and bring her to the appointment. We booked her a hotel room, and another doula brought her from the clinic to the hotel with a free airport shuttle. We got her a meal and stayed available till she left. So yeah, any money that they get goes directly to either the client or to the doula for reimbursements. So yeah, that's the CDP.
So thanks for supporting the Colorado Doula Project by attending this session or watching a replay later. Because there is going to be a replay, I'm feeling like having less introductions from the group so that people don't have to be seen by an anonymous group in the future is fine. I'm not super Zoom savvy also, so just if you need to get my attention and I'm not responding, keep trying. I'm doing my best to navigate that as well as this content. I wanted to share just a little bit more about my history and my philosophy, which we'll be going into and sharing more throughout this session, with the clarity that, you know, the factual information about the medications and how they work are things that you can get on Google, but the actual real-time experience, anecdotal wisdom, and philosophy that you will get from Bonnie and I as humans who have experience supporting people through these processes, that are not just what you can look up on the World Health Organization, is what we're hoping to spend more of our time here together on. I did study to be a midwife. I trained with Elizabeth Davis, who is the author of the book Orgasmic Birth. And she was a huge influence on my work, and understanding oxytocin, understanding traditional midwifery, womb to tomb care. And while she didn't teach specifically about abortion, I learned how to do pelvic exams with her, and I learned trauma-informed care of how to interact physically with people in this incredibly transformative, intimate space, and what labor was like, and all kinds of things. So I want to share Elizabeth Davis, Rosemary Gladstar has been a huge influence on my herbal studies. Susan Weed, Wapio Diane Bartlett is definitely an elder of mine. She calls herself a quantum midwife. And I want to share a quote from her as an overarching philosophy for everything shared moving forward in this session, which is ideas liberate, ideologies suffocate. Right? Ideas liberate, ideologies suffocate. So we'll do our best to let you know when we're sharing something that is a personal opinion versus a physical fact. And knowing that basically all reality is subjective. And what we are doing is sharing the best ideas that we have access to, what we think are the best ideas. And we're not here to teach you a specific ideology of any kind. We're here to share the best ideas we can in service to our healing and liberation. And so we're also coming to this work, I think I speak for both of us, like believing that abortion is part of nature. And that pregnancies that end in miscarriage and abortion and birth are all rites of passage that deserve witnessing, that deserve care and support, and that we can actually look to not just our own human lineage and our bloodlines and ancestors for support, that our ancestors had abortions, but we can also look to the natural world and see that different types of species and different life forms will begin the process of reproduction and then realize that there are not enough resources to follow through with that reproduction in a healthful way. Somebody's needs to mute. So I don't know where that went. So yeah, that abortion is not just a social good, but it's actually nature, that it's part of nature. I also want to just name Emma Goldman as a radical Jewish grandma anarchist that is an ancestor of mine intellectually and politically. And what else? And Carol Downer, Miss Carol Downer, who is one of the co-authors and editors of the book, A New View of a Woman's Body, and one of the creators of the process called menstrual extraction, which we don't have a lot of time to go into in this session, but know that that is in my miscarriage and abortion support course, and on Wikipedia, you can find out more about menstrual extraction easily from me or elsewhere. Is there anybody else lineage-wise that you want to name as an ancestor or influence in the room?
I mean, you've been a huge inspiration. Molly Dutton Kenny.
Molly, thanks for bringing up Molly. Miss Molly has taught me a lot of what I know.
Yeah. The Janes are like the Janes. You know. But yeah, you did a great job naming the people.
And then, disclaimer, we are not here claiming to be medical care providers. We are not licensed medical care providers. Anything we say, again, is in that spirit of like, this is the best idea that we have. It's not a prescription or a medical protocol. We are not telling you how to diagnose or treat or follow through with any protocols. We are giving you the best ideas and the best information that we have access to. We know a lot, and also we might feel differently about different things, and we might disagree and like share differing points of view at some point throughout this visit, and that's fine.
Totally.
And also we might not know things. You might ask us questions that we don't know the answer to, and that is all part of the process, and like take us off whatever pedestal you might have put us on. We are here as allies and comrades. And I wanted to share this quote from the book Witches, Midwives, and Nurses, which I consider essential reading for anybody who would like to understand how we got to where we are, politically and economically in terms of our medical system and the ways that traditional wise women's wisdom has been completely consumed and appropriated by these systems of oppression that are service industries that offer goods and services, but are not actually proficient or trained in any kind of healing modality. And like the difference between a healing modality and a service industry is a very significant difference. So professionalism, this is the quote from Barbara Einrich, and I forget who co-wrote it with her, but professionalism is nothing more than the institutionalization of a male upper class monopoly. We must never confuse professionalism with expertise. Expertise is something to work for and to share. Professionalism is by definition elitist and exclusive, sexist, racist, and classist. So understanding that the expertise, like becoming the own expert on your own womb health and reproductive and sexual health is the ideal, and that having support people that actually are trained in healing modalities rather than simply employed in institutions is a goal and is a remembrance. And that we're going to talk a bit about the history of abortion and abortion care at the beginning of this class. And we're going to run you through the agenda right now. Thanks, Naima, with the mic drop. I don't think the replay gets to see the chat, so I just want to go ahead and say somebody said mic drop. Do you want to read the agenda?
Sure.
Agenda.
So first we'll cover the historical and ecological context of abortion. We'll talk about the basic anatomy and physiology from Sam's book, Mapping the Universe, excuse me. We'll talk about progesterone, what is it, what are prostaglandins, and what is mifepristone and misoprostol, the two pills that are used. We'll go over risks and benefits, where to access these medications, and then we'll take a break, and then the second half, or there'll be a break in there somewhere, and then we'll talk about holistic healing options. So different healing modalities versus, the Western medical industrial complex, herbs, foods, and ritual. And then what does that say? Oh, the miscarriage abortion support course.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're going to try and make it through today. Plan on about 2 hours total. We're going to take a little break in the middle. Group agreements. I'm actually going to go get my sign.
Yeah.
To read off of.
Cool.
Yeah. You want to start talking about history?
Talking about what?
I was going to say history.
Oh, I thought you said mystery.
I don't have these memorized, but this is from when I used to teach live classes. It's a collage. And I just wanted to read it off of the sign instead of off of a computer screen. So these are the group agreements. I realize that this is like a different container being on Zoom, but I'm asking folks that are here currently and folks that are watching in the future to take a moment and center yourself on these agreements and politely see yourself out if you are not able to agree to the following, which is the first is radical non-judgment of self and others. I recognize that is like a lifelong project for a lot of us to have radical non-judgment, but just really, you cannot heal or improve if you can't accept where you're at right now. And it's so important for us to take judgment off of others, especially as we're talking about reproductive and sexual health and abortion.
Totally.
Also, making mistakes is part of learning, and it's okay to change your mind. Do you want to?
Yeah. In emotional situations, practice witnessing, not fixing.
So maybe since this isn't live, it's like this is more towards yourself. Like if you're feeling yourself having an emotional reaction, instead of judging it again as wrong, or like, I can't be feeling this way, I don't want to think this way, or just like observing, just taking a step back to observe. Take care of your needs before the group dynamic. So, you know, there will be a replay of this. Please do everything you can to stay in your body and stay in your breath, even though we are all looking at a screen together, this like modern hearth campfire thing. You know, every once in a while, maybe check in with your hips and your pelvic bowl and take a breath. Like, do you need to go pee? Do you need to stretch? Like, do what you need to do to be present and care for yourself before the group dynamic.
Speak for yourself. Don't assume shared experiences.
So this is really, really big, especially when we're talking about reproductive and sexual health. A lot of us have a lot of stories about what is normal or the way things are, and that's just not the case for everybody. So when you're bringing in a question or a comment, if you can speak with an I statement where you're actually taking ownership of the thought or the feeling that you're sharing, rather than speaking in generalizations. And that's a goal here.
Yep.
Do you want to do this one?
Yeah, and then gender is not anatomy. So you know, some of the quotes will use the word women. Sometimes we use women or woman, and know that, you know, that we acknowledge that there are lots of genders, and people other than cis women can get pregnant and have abortions all the time. So using gender inclusive language, to the best of your ability.
Yeah, we do our best. Certainly when we're like referencing elders and teachers and their quotes, there's going to be more of the word woman, but when I speak and in my writing, in my books and in my classes, like, it's not that hard to use the word person instead of woman. And in that way, you're able to include people that have various identities, and giving people adequate education about the womb is so important, regardless of like how they identify. If you have a uterus, this information is for you. If you don't have a uterus, this information is also for you because you came out of a uterus, right? So like everybody's origin story is pussy. There's nobody here that did not come out of a womb, and for whom understanding the processes of the womb won't and be able to inspire like a story of like, this is how cyclical life works. This is how our embodiment process works, which is in this waxing and waning.
Totally.
Cyclical, non-linear, you are not in control. And it's really all about dynamic balance, not control, when we're interacting with life force, right? Particularly the womb. So let's, without further ado, talk a little bit more about historical and ecological context.
Yeah, that sounds good. So yeah, basically there have been abortions and miscarriages happening as long as there have been humans. And I think the oldest found record of abortion management was in 3000 BC, somewhere in China, which just says a lot to me. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Sorry, honey.
No worries.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the next piece, agriculture?
Oh yeah, there's so much. Okay,
yeah,
so
we're just gonna kind of, there's a lot to share, so we're just gonna kind of bounce our knowledge and ideas back and forth with you guys.
So really placing abortion within this both historical and ecological context, I think is really important. I think a lot of us have cultural amnesia and think that contraception and abortion are like this new 20th century crazy thing that people are up to, when in fact it is something that has been happening as long as humans existed. We've had different tools and methods, and mostly we were working with plants until the Industrial Revolution. Suction abortion didn't become a thing until a lot more recently. And also infanticide was a lot more normal and socially accepted in different places as a method of contraception. We've been working with plants and we've been working with the moon, both of these things, plants and the moon, in order to discern our fertile windows and in order to plan our fertility throughout the ages. So really placing our contraception and abortion and fertility management within this ecological context, understanding that people who had wombs have been managing their fertility in order to be in synergy with their environment, the environment of their human kin and their families, and the environment of the space where they were perhaps wildcrafting, hunting, and gathering. For example, oh, we need to move this entire camp in this season, so we don't want to be giving birth there. So we need to be giving birth in this season in order to be able to walk this particular wildcrafting route and be mobile. And so pregnancy planning and therefore contraception and abortion have been happening forever. So just really wanting to help us ground into and root into this reality that this is an ancestral right for us to have access to this information. And even though the tools that we're talking about, particularly today with medication, are very new tools, that the action, the embodied sovereign fertility management is something that humans have been doing forever. And that the church and state actually didn't get that involved in it until the Industrial Revolution. And that a lot of folks are also under this misguided idea that abortion is a moral issue or contraception is a moral or religious or spiritual ethical issue, when in fact, it is much more an economic issue when it comes to the history and the way that the church and state got involved, specifically when they needed massive amounts of low-wage labor to work in factories. And then in fact, the Catholic Church did not say anything about abortion until 1863, which is really this apex of the Industrial Revolution, and that understanding that political and economic control is much more the motivation for the church and state than it is because they're spiritually or religiously concerned about that process.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah, I had a thought pop up that I just wanted to say, which is somewhat related to like the historical thing, but just I think a lot of us feel like, oh, you know, we can't talk to our elders or our ancestors about abortion. And I mean, everybody that we come from has in some way some context, you know, with abortion. And I have a friend who's an abortion doula as well, and they say they encourage everybody, you know, to ask your ancestors questions if there are some still living. You may be surprised at the stories that you get, or the wisdom too, you know,
or ask them in your dreams if they're dead.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. So just
have a nice mugwort bath.
Yes.
Before bed and set some ritual intention. So yeah, understanding that big historical and ecological context, that fertility management in order to live in synergy with your family and the land is very ancient, but also that our fertility and our sexuality are essential aspects of our spiritual and social lives before they became medicalized. That traditionally, for the vast majority of human history, our fertility and our sexuality were not medical conditions, and they were not things that we would go to an external authority or a male that this was something, and yes, it was women it was something that you would go to the medicine woman in your village, and the style of womb to tomb care that was the entirety of your life experience. That where you have your orgasms would generally be where you would have your abortions and your births also. And that awareness of how to manage your sexuality and your fertility was more of a social and spiritual question than a medical process for most of history. And so that's also a remembrance that I'm wanting to offer to everybody that I work with and folks that are watching and listening, that we be able to really remember that this is ours. This is not something we need to be asking for permission or seeking external authority to grant us access to, and that all of that is new. Yes. We have a majority of our history of like, this was our information.
It's our birthright.
And just that a rite of passage is a rite of passage specifically within the context of witnessing. And that is one of the most painful and unhealthy things around abortion now, is the secrecy and the shame. And I understand that there are legal realities that people can't talk about their abortions, and there are social realities where people are really in danger, and that does exist, and that the vast majority of us need to be talking about our abortions more, and that the more we talk about it, the more we normalize it, and allow our friends and loved ones to take care of us, the more we heal this immense amount of secrecy and shame.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm just going to bring up one of the illustrations from my Mapping the Yoniverse coloring book, to illustrate one of the foundational aspects of physiology that I want everyone to understand as we move into talking more about the physiology of abortion. Because there's another common myth or misconception around abortion is this idea that it could harm your fertility, and make it hard to carry a pregnancy in the future. And in this diagram, what we are looking at is 3 different layers of different types of tissue that are holding, that are the womb, right? So first we have the endometrium, and that is that soft, gooey, mucousy tissue that is going to wax and wane with the menstrual cycle, that can create the foundational nest or nourishment for a pregnancy. If you have an early pregnancy, it will need to embed into the endometrial tissue. I don't consider it a pregnancy until it actually attaches to the myometrium, which is this second layer here. The myometrium is solid muscle. It's a muscle that is a certain kind of muscle called a smooth muscle. Your heart is also made of smooth muscle tissue. And smooth muscle tissue, your digestion tract also is made of smooth muscle tissue. Can you sense a theme with the smooth muscles? They function without your intellect. They keep you alive. And so the myometrium is built like a basket, and it is of such strength and integrity, right? It's able to expand so big to hold a pregnancy and push a pregnancy out. It's extremely resilient, extremely strong. It's one of the strongest muscles in the human body. And when you remove the endometrium, you should not be harming the myometrium. In fact, it would take a lot of effort and negligence and a very extreme, bizarre situation to harm the myometrium in the process of removing the endometrium. It's extremely rare and difficult. And that endometrium is built for resilience. It's built for regeneration. Regardless of how far into a pregnancy you move, the endometrium and that soft mucousy tissue knows how to move out of the cervix, release, and then start the whole thing over again. Harming and removing the endometrial tissue does not, should not harm the myometrium, the muscle of the uterus. And then the perimetrium is just the casing that holds the uterus. It's kind of like an eyelid or a membrane. So does anybody have any questions about these 3 layers of tissue or how they relate to what we're going to be talking about today? Go ahead and raise a hand or just unmute yourself and ask, or going to take the screen down. We all clear on these 3 layers of tissue and how it's absolutely possible to remove a pregnancy and or the endometrial tissue without harming the myometrium, the muscle. Yeah, all good.
Hey, Sam.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. You had mentioned that you don't consider pregnancy a pregnancy until it is attached to the myometrium. Is that part of implantation as well, or does the fertilized blastocyte attached, or it's a zygote at that point, I guess, attached to the endometrium and then the myometrium, or does it all happen at once in implantation?
It's an excellent question. And I would refer you to really detailed diagrams that are in Please Bleed and Conscious Contraception to reference visually. But yeah, so the zygote is actually just in the egg tube. By the time it's made it into the womb, it's usually what we call a blastocyst.
There we go.
And so just to back up for anyone who is not familiar with this, and it is really a special and important part of the conversation. When conception happens, you know, the sperm meets the egg, there's a flash of light. It takes another few days where they're just in the egg tube and it's a zygote before that conception makes it into the womb. And then it's another handful of days of that little blastocyst, the conception just kind of like floating around. And it depends on how gooey and robust and like healthy the endometrial tissue is, how long it takes that blastocyst to get like blanketed and sucked into the endometrium so that it can nestle in and attach to the maternal blood network through the myometrium. That takes an average of 12 days. The process from conception to implantation, where that blastocyst is actually connected to the myometrium, takes an average of 12 days. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so I guess I just want to know, does it happen at this, like, does the endometrial sucking in and the myometrium connection, does that happen at the same time, or is it kind of just, again, that wishy-washy of like, it kind of gets sucked into the endometrium? Got it. Okay.
It's very wishy. So it will connect when it makes contact, from what I understand. And the process from like sinking in through the layers of the endometrium to attach to the myometrium, that's going to vary from body to body, from experience to experience. And that can happen really fast. Mm-hmm. Like it absolutely is within the range of physical possibility that like you conceive, it just like speeds down and it attaches. But on average, we're looking at 12 days. And those are 2 separate processes, I guess. I hope that is more the being enveloped by the endometrium and the attachment to the myometrium are 2 distinct processes that can be happening simultaneously, certainly, but I think are a distinction worth making.
And maybe if you wanted to look into chorionic villi, that you can actually get a visual of these little finger-like little things that come out and facilitate that process.
Totally. Thank you so much for that. I think I just had always never known that there was like that differentiation between the endometrial absorption and the myometrium attachment that was involved in this implantation experience, that I think is so important to know, again, about like what's happening inside of your body, which part of your body is like.
100%. And just like busting up that myth that like a condom breaks to get sperm in you and you get pregnant.
Right.
Pregnant. It's like, no, it takes a while. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks y'all for answering that.
You're so welcome. Okay, so we are moving so slow.
Okay.
We're gonna bust into, okay, what is this is a great segue into progesterone though.
Yeah.
Which is one of the main things that we want to share in terms of foundational physiology that we'll need to understand how the medications work. So progesterone, what is progesterone? Do you want to, or do you want me to? I guess it's pink.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Progesterone, it's a hormone. I like to remember it as the progestation hormone, progesterone. And it does a lot of things. But one of the things it does is thicken that endometrial tissue and make it a lot stickier and gooier so that it can absorb and catch any conception that might be floating by. And progesterone naturally is released after we ovulate. The little follicle that the egg popped out of becomes a little progesterone maker, an endocrine gland. And that progesterone is absolutely necessary to sustain a pregnancy, not only to thicken and nourish that endometrial tissue, also it raises the body temperature. So I like to describe it every single month when we ovulate, that progesterone spike is like preheating the oven to put a bun in the oven. Right? It's just like warming everything up, getting it all gooey. And then it's, you know, it's like, did we catch anything? Is there anything here? And if it doesn't, progesterone levels will go back down. But if you did conceive and if something is floating around or attaching there, progesterone levels will remain elevated throughout the entire pregnancy if the pregnancy is going to sustain itself. Yeah. Any questions about progesterone just on that elementary level? Also just want to share that it has so many health benefits, anti-anxiety, good for metabolism and digestion and mineral absorption and your skin and your sleep and so many things. There are so many reasons we need progesterone that have nothing to do with making a baby.
Good point. Yeah.
And so that's why it's really nice to ovulate.
Totally.
Regularly. To get progesterone, even if you're not trying to make a baby. That's one of the reasons having a healthy cycle is beneficial to the overall system. But understanding that you cannot have a pregnancy without heightened, sustained levels of progesterone is the main underlining fact we want you to have here.
Yeah.
And then prostaglandins is the other.
Yeah. So prostaglandins are a type of hormone in the body, and they are hugely involved with our inflammatory processes. So there are different types of prostaglandins. Some are anti-inflammatory and some are pro-inflammatory. It's very common for people to have an imbalance of the pro-inflammatory ones, and that can look different ways in people's bodies. But as far as relating to the uterus, they are important because they have to do with helping the uterus contract. So that what I'm talking about is menstrual cramping, and the uterus doing this kind of motion to help expel blood. And of course we want this when we are needing to have an abortion or there's a miscarriage happening. And another thing to note too is, we have prostaglandins in different parts of our bodies. There are some that are localized to the uterus, and not only do they affect the uterus, but they affect the surrounding areas as well. So that's why sometimes when someone is on their period, they may have diarrhea because the colon is right there, and that's also being squeezed and engaging in this contracting motion.
Is the colon also smooth muscle tissue?
Yes.
Yeah. So the colon and the whole digestive tract, like we said earlier, and the heart. And the uterus, all of these parts are made out of smooth muscles that are going to be affected by your prostaglandin levels. And just backing this up, both progesterone and prostaglandins are hormones. And if you're still kind of fuzzy around what the fuck is a hormone is anything that changes your body on a cellular level is a hormone. And hormones, it comes from the Greek god Hermes, who is the messenger. So you can think of hormones, they're released by little glands all over the body. There's receptors in different organs, and they are the messengers that are telling the body what to do. So the progesterone hormone is like, okay, let's get gooey, let's get hot, let's do these things so that we can sustain a pregnancy. And the prostaglandin hormones are helping those tissues inflame in a good way, because actually we think of inflammation as a bad thing a lot in our culture.
Totally.
And we are excessively inflamed from our diets and lifestyles in a lot of ways, but we need a certain amount of inflammation, especially in those smooth muscle tissues, in order to go through the process of digestion and in order to menstruate properly or release a pregnancy in a healthy way.
Totally.
Yeah, and I think we're just going to skip oxytocin for now and go straight to medications.
Sure.
So any questions about those two hormones before we move on to talk about the medications that fuck them up? Good? We're all good on progesterone and prostaglandins? All right, so most people, we're talking about, you know, the title of this was like the abortion pill info sesh, but it's not just a pill. It's generally lots of pills. It's not just a pill. There is one pill that is called mifepristone, that is also known as RU486, that the French developed in the 1980s. And that pill was developed specifically to interrupt the process of progesterone. It blocks the progesterone receptors in the body. It takes up the same space as the progesterone receptors, and it also helps inhibit the production of progesterone. So we can't sustain a pregnancy without progesterone, period. And by blocking progesterone with this medication that is usually known as mifepristone today, we make it so that you cannot sustain a pregnancy chemically. It's very important to understand that there is a difference between chemically ending a pregnancy and physically expelling it, and that those are two distinct processes that both need to have support if you're going to be releasing a pregnancy. So mifepristone is the pill that you can indeed order this on the internet. Check out Plan C and Aid Access for ways to order this online through reputable, trustworthy sources. Mifepristone is very inexpensive to produce. It's been around for well over 40 years. It's very safe and effective. And the lack of access that we have to it as consumers is fully political. It's a mechanism of political control. Understanding this medication, mifepristone, has a long history of being used safely and effectively to inhibit progesterone production and uptake and interrupt a pregnancy. The medication was made for that purpose, and has been around for a really long time. So when folks have a medical abortion and they go through a clinic or through a legal medical avenue where you're working with a practitioner, which can include telemedicine, mifepristone is the first medication that they will give you. And often if you are working within a clinical setting, they will ask you to take the mifepristone in front of them, which maybe they just don't trust you to go.
They say
take it.
It's because they want to make sure that, and they say they want to make sure you don't have any like allergic reactions or whatever, but
so 95 to 98% effective when it's combined with the drug misoprostol, which we are going to discuss here in just a second. So mifepristone is interrupting the progesterone, and misoprostol is a synthetic prostaglandin. You want to talk about misoprostol somewhere?
Yeah. So, yeah, like Sam said, misoprostol is a synthetic prostaglandin. So essentially, what it's doing is it is telling the uterus, "Oh wow, it's time that we really start contracting." It's interesting because it originally was developed as an anti-ulcer medication. So that's kind of how it first came about. Eventually, women in Brazil discovered that it also had this other side effect, and they started experimenting with it in this way. And it's really because of them.
So ironic to me because of the abortion laws in Brazil.
Yeah,
that it was Brazilian women that figured out
because of the laws.
Do you know what an ulcer is? Not to put you on the spot, but like physically what an ulcer is?
So, a gastric ulcer, like in the stomach, is essentially where the mucosal lining is worn away and worn away and worn away until it becomes an open sore.
Which is exactly what a pregnancy is.
Yeah.
Right? So the endometrial tissue is mucosa. And when you think about what a pregnancy is, it is a mass of tissue that has worn away the endometrium and is eating away.
Yes.
It's connected to the myometrium.
Totally.
And that, wow, I'm literally like, you're seeing the synapses happening around like stomach ulcers and pregnancies in this moment. Which I understood vaguely. I was like, oh yeah, cool. Misoprostol is a stomach ulcer medication. And it will, irritate smooth muscles, right? So misoprostol is a synthetic prostaglandin that is designed to move smooth muscle tissue.
Totally. Yeah. And for whatever reason, this specific there's many types of prostaglandins. So this one is E1, I think, prostaglandin E1. And so for whatever reason, it triggers these specific cells in the stomach to start producing more of that like gastric mucus to protect the stomach lining. Because NSAIDs, when they put people on
What's an NSAID?
A non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. So like over-the-counter painkillers.
Yeah.
So when people are prescribed NSAIDs longer term for whatever reason, one of the dangers is that they will develop ulcers because in response to this, we start producing more stomach acid, which eats away at the stomach lining. So this medication will help prevent that by encouraging more gastric mucus to be produced. So didn't really need to talk about that, but anyway.
Interesting, yeah.
So that's the link there.
And inflaming the smooth muscle tissue to help regenerate. I would imagine that would help blood flow.
Totally.
Circulation. Like inflammatory response is essentially blood flow.
Right. And when it's important,
Yeah, when you increase the blood flow to the uterus, you increase the coordination of the contractions in the uterus. So any questions about the difference between the chemical and physical ending of a pregnancy, right? The chemical ending of like the hormonal process that will sustain a pregnancy versus the physical expelling of a pregnancy, and that they're two different things. Is that clear to everybody? Yeah. And that's the difference between progesterone and prostaglandins and how the different medications interact. So, do you want to talk about how we can take the medications? Misoprostol?
Sure. Like
misoprostol is always taken orally.
Totally.
Correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So misoprostol, there are a couple ways that this can be taken. Of course, orally is one of them. Typically, if you take it orally, you will, I've seen people have the strongest side effects, which often look like diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting. It can kind of look like the flu.
But even with oral, I've never seen anybody be told to swallow it. When you take it orally, you put it under your tongue or you put it between your cheek and your gum so that it will dissolve slowly. Even if you're putting it in your mouth, it's still something that you want to dissolve really slowly. You wouldn't just swallow these pills.
Totally. If you do swallow it, it's probably going to come back up in a matter of minutes. And that's a problem because now you don't have the medication.
Right.
So there's that, and then you can also insert it vaginally, like as close to your cervix as possible. If you can't really get it up there, you can just use a little bit of water in your fingers. And that typically has the slowest onset and the fewest side effects as far as
and is actually
goes.
slightly more effective.
Yeah,
From
I
some
agree.
of the studies that actually the World Health Organization. And just like a side note to clarify and help everyone understand that legal protocol, what is culturally normal and what is the protocol of a practitioner in a certain state or a certain country, is going to be highly politically and culturally influenced. And that if you ever want to look things up in terms of statistics and safety and efficacy, the World Health Organization is a great spot to go for data that is like, oh, this is actually what's physically true about a human with slightly less political influence. Like, for example, with misoprostol, the World Health Organization acknowledges that you can use misoprostol to induce an abortion
alone,
anytime,
without mifepristone.
Also, like any age of gestation, whereas the range that you will be able to obtain misoprostol from a clinical setting in the United States, for example, is going to be much shorter. Some of them only offer it up to 9 weeks. The general range that I feel comfortable with somebody using misoprostol at home is between 6 and 13 weeks.
Yeah, same.
And that you don't actually want to use this medication prior to 6 weeks because the pregnancy isn't actually large enough to expel effectively, which is one of the things that I didn't fully understand. Like, why do we have to wait till we're 6 weeks to be able to use that medication? But it's part of the thing.
I'll just share that this midwife that I've worked with before explained it to me. She was like, well, just think of it as a booger. You know, it's like when you have a very small booger in your finger, it's really hard to flick off. But if there's a little bit more like mass to it, there's something to work with. So I really like that.
Yeah, boogers.
Yeah, boogers.
So, and then also that misoprostol is taken in separate doses. Usually spaced out 3 hours. Some folks say 4. There's like a little bit of wiggle room, right? And it's subjective. Again, like the World Health Organization versus a practitioner who is trained in a specific way will potentially use these medications in slightly different ways. Generally speaking, there is a mifepristone dose, and then there are 3 misoprostol doses that will happen over. I'll wait in one second. And that if you are already really effectively contracting and expelling, you don't need to take all 3 doses of misoprostol, and that can increase your risk of a hemorrhage. And we will cover some more about risks and benefits of medication abortions, as well as sourcing after we take a little break here in a minute. What was the question?
Is that 6 weeks from conception or 6 weeks from the date of last menstruation? So that's the way that the medical world dates a pregnancy is the first day of the pregnancy is actually the first day of your last period. So 6 weeks from your last period.
Yeah, that's like the medical official. And then like, if you actually know when you conceived, count from when you conceived, not from when you menstruate, because they choose that menstruation day because they're like, well, we're pretty sure you weren't pregnant before that. But sometimes we were, because that menstruation was actually implantation bleeding. So again, the waters of the womb are murky and subjective. And the best thing we can do as individuals is to know our own rhythms and our own cycles and act from those places, given the information and ideas we have access to. And yes, the medical age of gestation is always counted from your last menstrual period, the LMP.
Yeah. About how long does it typically take between when a pregnancy ends chemically to when there's a physical release?
So it depends. Usually in terms of the clinical protocol, we're talking about 1 day. We're talking about you take the mifepristone 1 day and you take the misoprostol the next day, or like 12 hours later.
Yeah, 12. I think it's like 12 to 24.
It's like within
depending on where you
24
go.
hours, you're going to want to instigate. And yeah, before we break, just acknowledging that the World Health Organization and many of our allies and colleagues know that misoprostol is effective without mifepristone, that you don't actually have to chemically end the pregnancy to effectively expel it. If you have access to mifepristone, fabulous. It's going to be way more effective than misoprostol alone. But misoprostol alone before 13 weeks is like 88% effective on average. And the plant medicines are extremely proficient if you are skilled and knowledgeable. Plant medicines are very capable of interfering with progesterone levels. There are specifically anti-progesterone plants and there are pro-estrogen plants that essentially progesterone and estrogen work in dynamic balance, so that if you are taking highly estrogenic plants, you can inhibit progesterone and its effects. So that is something worth mentioning as well, is that an herbal protocol replacing mifepristone is one option to increase the efficacy of misoprostol if you don't have access to mifepristone.
Should we take a break now, or do you want to add more things about miso and we could just keep going?
Yeah, I think. How's the temperature of the room? Do we want to take a break now, or do we want to keep talking about misoprostol?
I have a quick question about the miso, just because it's the train of thought. You said you wouldn't necessarily need to take all 3 if you are noticing that the contents are being expelled. But like, is that like, oh, I'm noticing that I'm spotting a little bit, so maybe I shouldn't take my second pill? Or like, it's like you want to be actively bleeding to be like, I'm not going to continue.
Yes, it's kind of like when you stimulate the contractions, and like you can feel and see that there's a constant movement. It's like once you've like kick-started the engine sort of feeling, like you don't need to keep like pressing on the gas, you just a little more gentle. Is that? Yeah, so you want to flow, I guess. Definitely. Is the answer. It's not like once you're spotting, you stop. It's like if you have an active flow, and you can feel that the uterus is contracting and moving and doing its job, then you potentially don't need to keep taking the medication because the uterus has already gotten the memo.
Got it. And in your guys' expertise, how long have you seen that happen? Because I've seen it like someone took miso and then like 1 hour later, they're like, it was just like, here we are. And is it, again, just different for each person? Like someone takes one and then 4 hours later, they're like, I don't need to take the second one, but it took a few hours to get going.
Yeah. To be honest with you, I guess I would say I've seen it more be that someone needed to use a couple rounds to really make sure that things are flowing versus like taking just one round and it being enough. That's just my experience. And I have seen it too, where like, for whatever reason, things are just not moving, which, you know, is a problem. So there are things you can do to kind of get things stimulated as far as like blood movers, or if it's like stagnant pelvic chi, which I guess we'll talk about those later. But it really just depends on the person. That's been my experience.
Yeah. And so I've only seen people not need to take all their doses a couple times. And I have supported somebody who was like, I think you're done. I don't think you need to keep taking it. And they did, and they hemorrhaged and went to the hospital and needed transfusions. I've also worked with people that took it and nothing happened. And then you wait a day or two and then you start over. And again, I want to just point us back to this reality that we're talking about messengers, right? And that the messengers of these synthetic pharmaceutical substances are not working in a vacuum that is like omnipotent and capable of like doing like they're definitely more effective than just plants a lot of the time in terms of like being more like universally effective, but that the environment of the body, which includes your psychology and your emotions, and it includes your hydration and your social situation, that there are all of these different messengers besides the synthetic pharmaceutical messengers that we need to be mindful of what communication is happening and what communication the individual is giving their body in addition to these medications to support a healthful release. Yeah, and that, yeah, everybody's bodies react different. There is definitely no one size fits all. The protocol of, it was like 800 milligrams every 3 hours for 3 doses, like that is a starting point that is like a common denominator, and that every single body and every single situation is going to be different. And I will just share here actually that this is one of my frustrations with the language self-managed abortion, which is becoming really popular in mainstream media and social media right now. It's like, we can have our own abortions, self-managed abortions. And I think it's really unsafe and unhealthy for people to do this in isolation, and that it's incredibly important to have a companion and to have an objective external support person who could be like, you are dehydrated.
Totally.
Like, you need to sit down, or like, you are losing too much blood. And that community supported abortion is what I wish we would be talking about instead of self-managed abortion, that it would be community care for abortion. And that, yeah, you don't, there's no way to by yourself. Like, you need somebody else to be able to help give you a reflection and support of what is normal. And we all just thank you all for being here, for getting more of an idea of what is normal. And we'll be sharing some more little risks, benefits, tips, tricks after we take a little break. Open to any more questions before we take just a 5-minute little pee stretch break. Any last lingering questions on the top of your head that you don't want to forget after the break? All right. Okay. So it's 13 after here. Let's go ahead and take a whole 7 minutes and see you at 20 after. And I'm going to put on the music again. Bloop.
Nice.
Why is Psycho Killer on? Like, that's not my mix. There we go.
tea. I drank like half of this already.
Oh yeah, where did I put my mug?
Did I take your mug?
No. I put it over here. You can put the video back on if you're feeling.
I don't know how to do that. I'm terrified of touching
Really?
whatever this. Yeah.
Welcome back, everybody. We're gonna go ahead and start, even though folks are gonna have a minute come back in. Just wanted to be mindful of time. And I hope everybody got some good wiggles, maybe a good pee. I went outside and put my feet on the earth, which is always a helpful reset. And so for the rest of our time here, we're gonna share a little bit about just kind of like your average medication abortion, knowing that there's like a massive range of experiences and what's normal. But we'll talk about a general normal experience and what some of our basic tips and tricks for how to support that process being as easeful and healing as possible. We're going to talk about risks and what the most common complications and risks are. And then we're going to get to dive into some holistic healing options. And Bonnie will share some of her favorite plant allies for this process. And I'll talk a little bit about ritual, maybe. We'll see like how we are doing on time. If you have to go ahead and go. Nobody needs to like sit here on ceremony. We might go a little bit over time just to not rush, and that's just where we're at. We will go until we are done. So blessed be if you have to take off. Much love and respect. We'll see you later. You can watch the replay. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into what is a normal medication abortion look like. And for this example, we will just imagine that someone got medication through a fully legal medical clinic or through telemedicine option, and they took the mifepristone. And mifepristone, most people don't feel huge. It's like a little bit of nausea, a little bit of, I'm not sure what's going on.
Yeah. I haven't seen too many side
Too many
effects
reactions from mifepristone.
But yes, so then 12 to 24 hours later, the person will take their round of miso. I have found that the bleeding can start anywhere from like immediately to a couple hours, honestly, even.
Generally within a few hours of your first dose, though, there's some movement starts to happen.
Yeah, so just as far as planning goes, I have had people in the past think, oh, I'll just take this medication and then drive myself somewhere, or just it's I think it's really important to try to like lay out a really realistic picture of how this is going to go and plan accordingly. And
I think 48 to 72 hours from the point of taking the first medication is ideal. And obviously a lot of us are slaves under capitalism, and that's not an option for us. But in an ideal world, I would say 48 to 72 hours from taking your first medication to be in a space where your primary job is having an abortion.
Totally.
Where you're not trying to be a mom or a waitress or whatever else, like that really your full-time job for this couple days is having an abortion.
Totally. Yeah. And so I find that most of the time, if it's done through a clinic, they don't really paint a very accurate picture of what it's like. And often we'll be like, oh, it's just like a really heavy period. But that is, I've never seen it just be like a heavy period. It's I would say more akin to having a mini labor or even just a labor. The pain is pretty real. And cramping is I mean, it's the uterus is literally contracting, so cramps are intense. Often people, like we said, get nauseous or vomit. I think it's really important to mention that the person needs to think about where they're going to be doing this.
Yeah.
It's unrealistic in my experience, to think that you're going to successfully be able to hide it
Yeah.
from whoever is in your house space.
This is really important.
So, you know, I mean, that is one way that you can support someone if you have the space and feel comfortable doing that. When I had a space like that, that was a really fulfilling way to support people, is like create a safe container for them to go through this experience. And you can also like help them incorporate ritual or ceremony or whatever that looks like. But yeah, that's like a huge piece to mention. It's like the
and
safe
just
space.
that I really like, especially in your household, and again, like this is a matter of culture, this is a matter of privilege. But I would say tell as many people as you feel safe telling, even if it feels like a little emotionally edgy. If it's politically and physically safe for you to tell people, like tell as many people as possible, and you will find that they are then telling you about their abortions and like really excited to help take care of you. And certainly telling the people that you share space with, if you are at all able to tell them that this process is going on, and that keeping it a secret, actually, there's no clinical data around this, but in my empirical anecdotal wisdom, the most prolonged bleedings that I have witnessed are happening with people who are trying to keep this process a secret. And I feel like it's like the womb is just like, I need attention.
Totally.
This is a thing.
I've
you
also,
can't pretend this isn't happening.
Yeah.
This is essential.
Totally.
Yeah.
I've also seen this happen with people who like refuse to engage emotionally in the process.
Yes.
Who are like,
yes,
I'm just going to numb out. Actually, I'm
Yeah.
not going to feel any of these things. Those have been the most difficult abortion or miscarriage processes, and have been the most prolonged as well.
Yeah. And then this is why we went ahead and used the byline for the witchy and wise, was because we are here interested in having a conversation with people who respect that the womb is a nexus where spirit and matter meet, and that our sexual energy, regardless of any particular structure you want to assign to how you relate to the divine, that our wombs and our sexuality and our reproductive capacities are in fact deeply connected to and intertwined to our relationship with source and to our relationship with our creative power. And that while we want everyone to be clear about what is happening with physiology and how to support that, that we are also here to have a conversation about what does it look like emotionally and psychospiritually to interrupt and expel a pregnancy. We have these medications that are capable of altering the physical reality. What do we need to be doing as individuals, or what do we need to be offering in terms of support as care providers to make sure that people are actually able to terminate and expel a pregnancy mentally and emotionally and spiritually? And what does that look like in ways that can actually support the physiology happening in a more easeful, cohesive way?
Totally.
Which medication abortion offers like a really profound opportunity, in that even if you're accessing the mifepristone in the clinic, the misoprostol is still taken in the privacy of your home. So the potential to be able to use ritual and all kinds of different things to support you on a hyperdimensional level is really vast. So going back to the physiology though.
Oh yeah.
So we start having some bleeding, we start having some cramping. What have you seen in terms of the difference between like subbuccal and vaginal labor? Do you see much of a difference?
You know, I don't know that I've seen much of a difference with that, as much as just like the unpleasant side effects personally.
Yeah.
I find them to both be pretty effective. What about you?
I have absolutely seen that vaginal insertion over oral has less vomiting,
for sure,
right? Because like when you're taking it orally, you're putting it into your stomach as well as your intestines, and your womb, whereas when you insert it right next to the womb, you are applying it locally to the specific smooth muscles that need to receive that medication. And like definitely diarrhea and some tummy upset is still happening for people, but I'm seeing it be a lot less of the violent vomiting.
Totally.
And therefore less dehydration. And like easier, safer to be like in a bathtub, things like that.
I definitely prefer that way.
And much slower onset. I find that the onset with vaginal insertion, and that's something that there is data around, like it will often take 12 to 24 hours after the very first dose of a vaginal insertion for things to start moving a lot. But I find that time is really valuable, and that we can do those things for the emotional and psychospiritual and holistic self to help engage our full selves in the process.
Totally.
And help prepare for a more gradual release. And that I have supported one individual who was like a Kundalini yogi, and who I had a really deep emotional connection with, and we spent a lot of time preparing, and we had a lot of ritual, who had a vaginal insertion experience where she felt like it was like a heavy period. And at no point was the pain out of her control or on top of her. She was just like, oh, this is intense. I'm bleeding. I'm passing a pregnancy. And then I'm going to sleep.
Yeah.
So I do have just that one story of medication abortion being what this individual described as quite easeful for her. And I want to say that she did a lot of work psychospiritually, and we gave her a lot of support herbally. And she had a specific mantra, and she had a candle, and she was just like so well prepared, that yeah, she had a really she had a good experience.
Totally.
But that is an outlier, but I want people to know that it is a possibility.
Right. Well, let's see here. I guess back to typically what the process looks like. I usually see people having like the main event, several hours like after they start the process with these pills.
Like 6 to 12 ish.
Yeah, I would say like
half a day.
within 6 hours. Yeah. Sometimes longer.
Oh, and just understand that there is a birth that's going to happen. It's not just contracting and it's not just bleeding, but at some point there will be the expelling of a pregnancy and pregnancy tissue. And that's actually a really important thing as a support person, is to ask how they want to refer to that tissue and to that pregnancy. Some people do want to call it their baby. Some people don't. Some people want to call it the products of conception. Some people, like I had actually one client who wanted to call it Ponyo.
I love that.
It was like, and then Ponyo came.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a huge.
So ask them what they want.
Yeah.
And then also be prepared for an actual birthing process. Like there's a gradual labor, and then there is an actual birthing of the pregnancy tissue, which it's ideal to have a bowl in the toilet or to be paying attention to what's coming out on a pad, so that you can actually identify the pregnancy when it moves out of the body, and distinguish it from all of the other tissue and clots and blood.
Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't always come out intact, like a recognizable pregnancy, but the tissue will look different. So.
And it's generally creamy or pink and a different texture than the blood clots. And another thing that you can do is put it in a jar of water, and it will float, whereas most of the other blood and tissue will sink.
Yeah. And if it's far along enough to have those chorionic villi that we were talking about earlier, if it's in water, it sort of looks, how do you describe what it looks like? Like little fringe like fingers almost. How else would you describe it?
Fringy.
Yeah,
It's very sea creature. There's a lot of sea creature vibes going on.
Yeah,
Because it's not meant to breathe air, it's in the water.
totally.
And so that can be tricky, you know, if you've like a horrible diarrhea or you're in a lot of pain or you're out of it, to actually like keep track of what's coming out of you. But that's really important as a support person, to be tending and monitoring if possible. And sometimes you just got to cut your losses and you're like, okay, this is too crazy. There's too much diarrhea and vomit in this toilet and we just don't know what's going on. That does happen. But there's also plenty of times where it's like, oh, we're catching this on a pad, or oh, we're catching this in a bowl, and we're able to be with it in a reverent way to discern, like, is this the pregnancy? Did we expel the pregnancy? And that's really useful information. And then it's also really useful for a lot of folks that want to do ceremony to bury or burn or release into a body of water, and have something that is meaningful for them emotionally or spiritually to release the pregnancy, not just from their body, but to have that time to make a conscious release, using the elements, using elemental magic to help us transform matter.
Totally. I love that. I guess one thing to add too is sometimes people are farther along than they think, and like flushing that those products of conception down the toilet has been a way that people have gotten in trouble, you know?
Yeah.
So just that's just something to keep in mind as well.
Wow. Right. Which is so sad.
Yeah.
And that is, even recently, somebody has been persecuted for having a miscarriage in this country, like in the last couple of weeks. So yeah, the benefits of having your own tissue and then burning or burying.
Totally.
You know, I wouldn't suggest releasing into a public body of water, but like, sometimes it's the ocean or like a big river, like it can be beautiful, but just be mindful of what you're doing with that.
Totally. And as far as like bleeding
after,
I mean, I feel like what's most common is for like the first 24 hours to be kind of like a big main event. People can bleed for weeks afterwards. It really is so varied. But a good rule of thumb is the bleeding should always be like tapering off.
And it should be red.
It gets
black in the end.
It shouldn't be like it shouldn't be like tapering off and getting like lighter in color and then come back with a vengeance and like be bright red and more heavy. So it should always be kind of like, you know, dipping off. What else do you want to add about?
Generally the things slow down after the birth. And again, with like what's normal for bleeding, our bodies are not machines and they all work individually and differently. So it really depends on that individual's state of being, but there are a lot of things that are universally supportive to folks that we'll go into in just a minute in terms of nourishment and herbs and rest and just like what else needs to be said about the process. I think preparing properly in terms of nutrition and rest and having meals prepared and potentially even activities prepared. Similar to when I was working with birth clients, like I took all of my birth labor intentions worksheets and things and made them for abortion and miscarriage later, and was like, do you have like a craft project that you want to be working on? And like sometimes the labor requires 100% of your attention, and sometimes it's actually really nice to have a distraction, like a collage project or a knitting project or like baking a cake.
Love that.
So I like to have those, and all of that is all my worksheets and handouts, my intentions worksheets, my intakes, my postpartum care worksheets for any type of abortion or miscarriage process are in my course, which after today I'm going to be making Pay What You Can for everybody available. So if you want those specific worksheets of like, here are little questions to be asking before you move through an abortion process. And like, do you want to have crafts ready? What foods do you want to have ready? And just don't eat anything 24 hours prior or during that you don't want to vomit up. And obviously nobody wants to vomit, but if you do vomit, it's nicer to vomit up a smoothie or some broth than it is like some Indian food.
Totally.
Right? Or anything spicy or chunky or a cheeseburger. That like sticking with really warming foods, broths and soups and smoothies and popsicles and things like that, that are going to be simpler to digest, going to take less energy from your body to digest because they're already liquid. Not just that you can't eat solid foods, but just like chew really well and slowly and make sure that you're eating mindfully.
Yeah. Yeah. And go into it already well hydrated, well rested, and nourished, because if you go into it depleted, it's so difficult to come back from that when you're already in the process. That can get really, I mean, dehydration is not a good thing. So just wanted to add that.
And that the basic principles of any type of bleeding coming from a uterus, whether or not it's menstruation, abortion, miscarriage, birth, or the postpartum from any type of pregnancy release, the basic things that I wish everybody knew and everybody in those experiences had access to is rest, nourishment, and heat. And it's really that simple. And it's really that tragic that those fundamental things are not widely known, that the vast majority of people who are menstruating and releasing pregnancies are not having those things. And that it's actually not our responsibility when we're bleeding to self-care. And this whole culture of self-care is really harmful and bullshit. It's actually the responsibility of our partners and our friends and our aunties and our grandmas and our community to make sure that we have the rest, nourishment, and heat that we need. It should not be on the individual. Again, why I don't like this self-managed abortion. I was like, you shouldn't have to manage by yourself. You should have amazing care and kindness.
Yeah. And I think also it's important for people to have a realistic picture of, how much time it's going to take to be in a position where they can go back to work. And obviously, like Sam said, so many of us really can't afford to take much time off of work. But I think that at least the next day, you know what I mean? Like ideally a couple days
off.
Totally. I've had people who think, they can just go back to work, and that's really tough.
It's a lot of work to have a pregnancy.
It's a lot of work
to expel a pregnancy, regardless. It's like metabolically, calorically, nervomuscularly, like it's work. Like you need some rest afterwards. And that the more you're able to rest and nourish in the immediate postpartum, the less prolonged complications you're going to have in terms of prolonged bleeding, and deficiency in general. I guess that's another thing to throw out, is like, don't put anything in your vagina.
Yeah, totally.
The general clinical recommendation is until you've completely stopped bleeding. And I think that's ideal, especially for the first like week or so. The cervix is going to be more open and dilated, and it's more vulnerable to bacterial infections. So no tampons, no cups, no sponges to catch the blood, just pads,
People say don't take a bath.
People say don't take a bath. I don't subscribe to that. But like it depends on like what kind of bath you have, I guess.
Yeah, like, I agree with that, but that's just
like, don't masturbate in the bath. Maybe like, like things are generally going to be more closed. Like you have to get water up in your vagina in the bath is like
totally.
Not that it's impossible. Again, this isn't medical advice. That's actually one thing that I would question, that the medical industry is always like, don't take a bath. I'm like, baths, like the
so
way that nourishes my nervous system and helps ease cramps, which That would be my biggest tip also for the whole process, is staying really, really warm, having really good circulation throughout, especially making sure that the tummy and the low hips have extra layers on them.
Yeah.
To stay all your vital organs, including your womb and your digestion and your kidneys, to have extra heat. And I like to double up instead of just having a hot water bottle heater on the womb, to have one also on the sacrum. I find is really good to have both sides supported, because all the ligaments, the womb is like in a hammock of ligaments in the pelvis, and some real big ones are connected to your low back. So having a heat source for the low back and the low belly at the same time, and like often we'll like tie that with a big wool scarf to somebody. With that. Yeah.
No, that's great.
Any other, yeah, I think we're into tips and tricks. Do we want to take a pause before we go into just like holistic healing and tips and tricks around this? Anybody have any questions about just like the straightforward medication like process before we go into all the context that we find supportive?
How long do you find that the diarrhea normally lasts? Again, this is like normally varying for each person, but like, or when there's that question, and then like, when does it seem alarming that diarrhea is persisting?
Few days.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's like, as long as, that those prostaglandins are in your system.
Yeah, it's going to take a few days to flush the synthetic prostaglandins out. And the best way to support that is by staying really, really well hydrated and eating really, really good food that is going to be easy to digest and help just your whole system move out. Anything past a couple days, I would be looking for more support.
Where besides Planned Parenthood is good to go for women to be seen? Is there an online place of resources across the states, or is it more locally variant?
It's extremely locally variant. The telemedicine services that are available in the United States have increased exponentially since COVID. We're so lucky. And there are several states where telemedicine abortion is like totally accessible and the norm, and it's a state-by-state thing. Planned Parenthood. Yeah, you're like, I don't want to talk about Planned Parenthood. Yeah,
it's fine.
Yeah. I strongly recommend seeking out an independent clinic over Planned Parenthood if it's at all possible. Planned Parenthood, while there's fabulous individuals that work for the organization and they have a beautiful mission, the way that it is set up is in cahoots, in like connection with pharmaceutical companies and government funding in such a way that they're not really able to advocate for true informed consent on a fundamental level. And that's a whole other lecture to understand, but independent clinics is what I would most highly recommend in terms of in-person care. If you can find one over Planned Parenthood, not just because of the politics of Planned Parenthood, but because of the life force and funding and connection that independent clinics deserve and need. And then, so Plan C is kind of like the main go-to for accessing the medication without a practitioner involved. And what Plan C does is they resource them. They've tested out a whole bunch of different online sources of the medications, and they've created a report card that compares the quality of the medication and its efficacy and the price and the speed at which you will get the medication. And their top rated organization is Aid Access, which is a spin-off from Women on Waves, which was this amazing project started by a UN worker who was like sailing around countries where abortion is illegal, like just outside of their border in international waters, and boating women out to access the pills and then sending them home with their pills on boats. So there's a really great documentary about women on waves that you can find online, I think for free also. And then Aid Access, I'm pretty sure that Aid Access is telemedicine. Also, it's not just the medication. So when you contact Aid Access, you should have an appointment with a medically trained professional who will assess your situation before you're mailed the medication. And those are some of the ways to access it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and we could, like, I don't want to get too much into, accessibility, but I think it is worth mentioning that that is just like such a huge issue, especially for people of color and, queer and trans people, but especially people of color. So sometimes, Planned Parenthood is all you got, and that's what we have to work with,
Right. And so all of the online sources of medication, including Aid Access, it's like, they function in this universal law sort of ethics that are not necessarily congruent with state by state jurisdiction. So just because you can order the pills and see a practitioner online through Aid Access does not mean that you're impervious, that you can't be prosecuted by local law enforcement. And for that, I recommend everybody look into and reach out to an organization called If, When, How, which is an amazing nonprofit that provides legal advice and can give you more specific state by state information for the United States about the risks. And it's just like all of our health choices have risks and benefits. So the risks and benefits of going to a clinic versus ordering pills online versus resourcing yourself through the pills through a veterinarian or a midwife, which again, like, I'm not recommending that you do that. I'm not inciting criminal activity here, but I want you to know that misoprostol is part of the pharmacopoeia, the access of medications, that most midwives have access to misoprostol because it's also used at full-term labor to stimulate labor, and that it's also used by veterinarians. So again, not recommending it, but saying that misoprostol is available through many different avenues besides the ones that are clinically and legally sanctioned. And then it's also over the counter in Mexico. It's an over-the-counter medication.
Yeah. I don't really have anything to add to that. That was pretty succinct.
Yeah. And bringing up like the importance of being sensitive. And it's actually really broken my heart, like watching Plan C's, like online social media campaigns and language, and just that they're not really giving people a complete picture of the reality of the risks involved. Right? They're making it seem like it's completely benign and joyful and easy and like 80s pop art cool to order these pills online, of like anybody in all 50 states can order the pills online. It's totally cool. It's great. We're all liberated. It's like, yes, that's amazing. That's so cool that this is possible. And people that are in marginalized and impoverished communities, which is disproportionately people of color, that are in over-policed neighborhoods, are in more danger than middle-class white ladies ordering their pills on the internet, living in a big city, which is, I think, the narrative that is promoted by social media and their campaigns is like, it's just super chill. You just order it online. It's great. We're so liberated. I'm like, yeah, I have a complex relationship with that narrative of like, yes, it's joyful. I'm so excited that these organizations exist. And I don't want to be a fear monger. I don't want people to be afraid of accessing care and medications. And I want people to be properly informed of the risks and benefits of all their choices. And for some people, it might actually be safer for them to access it through an underground source
Totally.
than through one of these online organizations. And that is, again, like an individual risk benefit analysis. And If, When, How is an amazing organization for free legal counsel for people to be able to make those choices for themselves.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
Should we move?
You want to talk about some herbs?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, should we move into risks and like
Risks.
or you
Oh
to,
yeah,
or-
let's talk more about risks since we
really
were already
quick?
talking about legal risks.
Yeah.
And we're like 5 minutes. We're like, there's some risks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So hemorrhage, infection, and incomplete are the main 3 physical risks. And they're pretty low in terms of the percentages of folks that are experiencing hemorrhages, infections, and incomplete abortions with these medications. I don't have the stats in front of me. I want to say it's like well under 5%.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, like check World Health Organization for like most universal recent data. Generally pretty low risk, and understanding that hemorrhage, infection, and incomplete abortion are the main risks with every single type of abortion method, not just the medication, also with suction, and that the risks, the rates of these complications for medication are actually quite similar to if you were having a clinical suction procedure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would just add, if you do think that it is incomplete, meaning there's still fetal tissue inside of you, and that's not good, because that can potentially cause infection.
Right.
So there's no medical way to tell the difference between miscarriage and abortion. So if you're hemorrhaging and you need to get somewhere, don't not go because you're afraid of getting in trouble. You can just say that you started having a miscarriage.
Yeah, tell them you're having a miscarriage. And the general rule of thumb for hemorrhage assessment is if you are filling up an overnight pad every hour for more than 1 hour, then that's time to go get some support. You might just need some fluids. You might just need an IV of some saline because you're losing fluids too fast.
Yeah.
You might get some Pitocin to contract your uterus really hard.
And I definitely encourage people to have maxi pads at the house, like on hand already, as opposed to some other pad, because that is the way that we can kind of track how much someone's bleeding.
And this is one of the rare cases where I would encourage people to use disposable pads.
Yeah, totally. And then the other thing I was just going to add is, if you're past the main event and you're unsure if it's complete or not, you could always get an ultrasound. That's a great way to just double check. And you can, again, just tell them that you think you miscarried. If you have insurance, that's great. You could get it covered that way. Planned Parenthood offers ultrasounds and lots of other people too. I wouldn't recommend going to a pregnancy crisis center to use their free ultrasounds, because they can interpret it however they want to, and it's just yucky.
They're not medical.
They're not medical. They're not your ally. So
we're losing light.
Did we get? How would someone tell there's left to reveal issue when they saw price in this event? If you have continued signs of pregnancy, like if those signs just have not gone away, you don't feel better, you're still having like morning sickness or cravings or tender breasts, things like that. Unfortunately, if you take a pregnancy test, even up to like 3 or 4 weeks, it can still read positive, because those pregnancy hormones are
6.
Yeah,
I've seen it up to 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Like the hormones are not indicative. You can expel and be rid of the entirety of the tissue, and the hormones can take a really long time to self-regulate. So we are a little bit in the dark. Like literally you need an ultrasound. Yeah. Like you need an ultrasound, or you need to be practicing fertility awareness and to have discerned and detected your fertile window and your ovulation as another way of just like, oh yeah, I'm not pregnant anymore because I ovulated.
Totally, yeah.
And so that is an area that ultrasound is really the diagnostic tool to be 100% sure that the process is complete. Unless you have ovulation and a fully normal period return, ultrasound is really the only way to fully be confident that you're not pregnant, because those hormone tests, those over-the-counter hormone tests, will continue to say that you're pregnant. Like, often I've seen people have them, like, they're like, I've already had 2 periods past my abortion, and like, and this pregnancy test still says I'm pregnant.
Oh, what was I gonna say? Oh, and your fertility can be, kind of unpredictable in the first, like, after something like this. Like, don't think, oh, 2 weeks from the day that I had an abortion or a miscarriage, I'm gonna ovulate. It's not gonna be quite like that. And I have seen people get pregnant again accidentally right after, because, fertility is kind of unpredictable in that way. Is there another question? No. You add something?
No. Just that we're at time and like haven't gotten into
I know
much of the holistic goodness. How long does it take for your cycle to return to normal then after an abortion? So again, this is like asking how long does it take for your cycle to return to normal after taking synthetic hormonal contraception, and it's going to depend on the individual's endocrine system. It's going to depend on their digestion, their metabolic resilience. There's no rule. I think that what's considered generally normal is like a few months. Like, it really depends on, and also the age of gestation of that, when the pregnancy was expelled, like how long it's going to take the body to return to a baseline. And you just said, you're like, you won't ovulate 2 weeks after, and I'll be like, I did.
Totally.
Like, I did ovulate 2 weeks after I had an abortion. I took a lot of chaste tree and motherwort, and I was doing a whole lot of things beforehand and during to nourish my system. Usually 6 to 8 weeks, the norm is like a period will come back, but just because you're having a period doesn't mean you're ovulating also. So that's a whole other conversation about fertility awareness and the different ways that we can know that we are ovulating. And were you even ovulating before you, like, regularly? Obviously you ovulated to get pregnant. But like, were you having a regular cycle? And that so much of this is contextual, not just to the physiology, but the psycho-spiritual, emotional context of, like, what are your beliefs around abortion? Like, what do you believe is supposed to be happening? Like, do you think you're supposed to suffer? And like, that it's supposed to be hard, because then it probably will be. Versus I was like, oh, cool, this is fine. My body knows how to do this. Like, my uterus knows how to give birth and release, and then I'm gonna just get back on the train and start cycling again. And my body was like, sweet, let's do it, let's go. And also just that a massive amount of pregnancies are expelled within the first 5 weeks. That's just like part of our physiology. Not all pregnancies are meant to be babies. And that our bodies know how to do that. They really do know how to let go and start over. And that, again, it's like really good liver, kidney, and digestive support through nutrition and herbs are the things that are going to help the body process the hormones, the prostaglandins and the pregnancy hormones, and that there's no substitute for that rest, nourishment, and heat in terms of the reset that our bodies need. And the more you're able to have the rest and the nourishment and the heat, the more the body will be able to recalibrate. And a lot of this, again, like with the nervous system, like your nervous system will react to your mindset and your context socially and emotionally, and that will affect your physical health. I'm like, oh, I know I'm loud. Yeah. bowl food, hydrate, nourish. Should we talk a little bit about, or we do a little bit of herbs before we say goodbye?
Sure, yeah. If people are feeling that.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. So yeah, let's, and I guess, we can see what else we have time for, but
Let's just talk about herbs and nutrition for a minute.
okay. I want to find
Your notes.
my little bullet
They're
points.
down a little bit more.
Okay.
And so like, what are we losing when we lose a
Mhm.
pregnancy on a just like a very basic fundamental level? We're losing blood.
Mhm.
And what is blood full of? Minerals, actually. And that's like a whole trippy thing when you think about just your blood being made of the same thing as stars. Anyway,
I love that.
just to get a little out there for a minute, but we're losing all of this mineral
Totally.
richness. So that's one of the most basic things we can do to support before, during, and after is have a diet and an herbal protocol that is really deeply nourishing of our mineral contents. And so I'll let you
Sure.
talk about some specifics.
So there's different classes of herbs. One is called nutritives, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's just full of vitamins and minerals. So those are really great herbs to be, making teas out of, specifically teas as opposed to tinctures, because these vitamins and minerals really need the water to be extracted. So if you can do what's called an overnight infusion, you put your loose herbs in a jar, even a ball jar or something like this. A French press, cover it with hot water and then let it sit overnight and strain in the morning. That is ideal. So yeah, definitely be doing that kind of thing. I would say at least ideally like a week or even 2 before the actual process.
Yeah.
And then same for afterwards. So
just good to start, like, even if you don't know if you're having an abortion or not, actually. Just anybody who's pregnant should, I don't want to shit on people.
Yeah.
But it's a great idea for anybody who's pregnant, regardless of the outcome. When you figure out you're pregnant, like, start doing overnight nettle infusions is a great place to start.
Yeah. And like we've said before, I have definitely seen like the more nourished someone is before, the more easeful their recovery is going to be, and the more easeful the actual process is going to be. So like Sam just mentioned, nettles is one of my favorites. Oat straw is a really wonderful one, and that also is really nourishing to the nervous system. And raspberry leaf, I feel like that's one of the most well-known reproductive herbs. And not only is it really rich in vitamins and minerals, but it also helps basically tonify the uterus. So it helps it be the most functional and efficient as far as these contractions go.
Because you remember, like, we can't use our brains for the smooth muscles, but the smooth muscles can still be toned. It's the same concept as toning your similar concept to like toning your upper body strength is like the raspberry leaf can help tone the muscles of the uterus so that contractions can be more coordinated and so that the uterus can return to a pre-pregnancy size faster.
Yeah, and another class of herbs that I really love are nervines. So these are herbs that affect the nervous system. Usually they have some kind of calming effect. They can be really great for anxiety. Some of them are even a little bit sedative. And usually what goes hand in hand with that sedative quality is pain relieving. They affect our pain receptors too. There's not going to be an herb that is just as effective as getting a prescription painkiller, like if you were to do it through the clinic. So I do like to paint an accurate picture for people. Like, you still are going to experience quite a bit of pain, so like if that's, that's just something to be realistic about. So using like doula techniques to help. Go ahead.
I don't want to interrupt talking about herbs some more, because like, echinacea, also vitamin C, risks of infection can go down if you're taking immune support. But I do want to just make a little bookmark to talk about the difference between pain and suffering.
Yes.
You want me to just do it now?
Yeah, totally.
Oh, okay.
You should.
So, I find, and this is going into philosophy land a bit more, but there is there are psychological studies, like you Google psychology today, like the psychology of pain, and the reality that our anticipation of pain and our mental attitude towards the pain actually really changes the experience and the impact of pain. And that if we're anticipating a lot of pain, we will experience way more pain than if we're not anticipating pain, the same exact situation, we won't experience as much pain. And so here's where doula skills come in. And again, just like another plug for my whole miscarriage and abortion support e-course, which is going to be pay what you can after this. And everybody who's registered will get an email with a link if they want to take it, is really looking at the purpose of pain, which is communication, right? That the body is communicating to you that a certain kind of change needs to happen for life to be intact or integrity or moving with a momentum that is healthy. Like pain is always communication that something needs to change. And that when we are using our own willpower to terminate a pregnancy, that pain is actually a communicative force that our own will is being done. And however we're able to make meaning of that pain, we're able to reduce suffering. And that there's a difference between pain and suffering. And that what I always aim to offer clients or students through the whole womb continuum, but specifically with pregnancy release, is that we can actually anticipate pain and preemptively meet that with things like heat and breathing exercises and mantras and movement and different doula practices, which again, I go into a lot in my e-course, but that we can anticipate pain to reduce suffering as care providers, and that we can also make meaning of our pain to prevent suffering. And that that's something that I find is really powerful within the human psyche and experience, is that when we are able to really make meaning of pain, we are able to handle it better and not suffer. And that pain is an inherent part of pregnancy release for most people, but suffering is largely contextual and culturally inflicted, and you do not have to suffer in an abortion or a pregnancy release of any kind. And there's a lot of really great things we can do to help mitigate pain and prevent suffering from happening. And
I'm so glad you said that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that meaning part is like just so powerful.
Totally.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So nutritive herbs, nervine herbs.
So yeah, some of my favorite nervines are California poppy, skullcap, motherwort, and rose. There's literally so many herbs that can get the job done, but these are just a couple of my favorites. And then another category of herbs that I like to use are liver supportive herbs, because the liver is hugely linked to hormone production and hormone processing, as well as processing some of the things that we may be putting into our body, like the medication. So yeah, some really common ones are burdock, dandelion, turmeric, and milk thistle. I would stay away from St. John's wort. That's a common liver herb, because it affects the rate at which your liver processes things. It speeds it up. So we don't want that to be happening when we're taking this medication. We need it to be in our system, in order to do the job. And then let's see what else.
Herbal oils I want to mention in terms of like salves and oils to add to your bath water or to rub the belly with, can be huge. Like shout out to cannabis also.
Totally. Yeah, that can be great.
Yeah.
Especially for like the nausea, helping people actually be able to eat something.
And just the attitude aspect of it could be really I don't know, my experience, I started using cannabis as a teenager with menstrual cramps. And I was like, it doesn't make the pain go away,
Right.
but it makes me okay with being in pain.
Totally. Yeah,
And it like makes the conversation easier. I'm just like, oh yeah, my uterus is working right now. Like, you do your thing.
Totally.
I'm just gonna chill here. You do the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so helpful. Another thing that I like, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, just that you don't also have to use THC with
Right.
cannabis.
Right.
And that like this may be a little out there for some people, but anal suppositories are so good at reaching all of the nerves in the pelvic bowl for any type of menstrual or pregnancy release. And often you will just shit it out pretty quickly. Like, that is a risk, but also like considering like an anal cannabis suppository along with your misoprostol insertion as a way to support everything opening and relaxing here.
Totally. Yeah, and I was just going to add another thing that I really like to use topically or just like on the skin is this Chinese liniment that you can find online called Zhangu Shui.
What's a liniment?
A liniment is an alcohol-based herbal extract that you put on the skin, and it because it's alcohol-based, it penetrates the tissue a lot deeper and I find faster than sometimes an oil. So like this stuff has herbs that promote circulation, which is great for blood flow and kind of easing that muscle, as well as menthol and camphor, which are cooling and can be kind of like distracting to the brain as far as the pain goes. So that's something that I really like to use.
I just want to say this is not a time for yoni steaming.
No, definitely not a time for
yoni steaming. Yeah. I'm a big fan for other things for yoni steaming, but do not yoni steam during your abortion or even after until you have had no bleeding, I would say for like a full week of no bleeding before doing a pelvic steam.
Totally. I'm glad that you said that. Yeah. And then just a note, if grief is a piece of the picture, which is definitely like, there's this misconception that every single person who has an abortion is sad about it. That's certainly not the case. And if, there is some emotions to process, some of my favorite herbs to help with that are heart-centered herbs. So these are hawthorn, linden, rose, and then again, our nervines, which act on our nervous system. Yeah, go ahead. No,
and flower essences. And again, I have like a little encyclopedia, both in my Holistic Healing After Abortion book and in the full course. Like the book is kind of like the mini encyclopedia, and the course is like the more blossomed, robust system around it that goes into a lot more depth, but like nervines, painkillers, blood builders, nutritives, flower essences, essential oils, like that's all in the book and the course for folks that want to dive deeper than these are just like little morsels.
Sprinklings. I guess just the last thing I wanted to mention was a little bit more on the nutrition piece. So there's going to be an inevitable hormone crash, because a pregnancy produces more hormones. So our levels become elevated. So when the pregnancy is no longer there, it's like pulling the rug out from under someone, and that can be really uncomfortable. So eating foods that contain the cofactors needed to make hormones really support this, as well as
micronutrients would be another word for it.
Totally.
I think, just for folks' language.
Yeah. So the micronutrients needed to make this are dietary protein, cholesterol, essential fatty acids, zinc, vitamin C, all of the B vitamins, and magnesium. And essentially what that looks like is eating a whole foods based diet, lots of dark leafy greens,
with vinegar,
because that extracts the minerals.
Leafies, like you need to eat leafies with some vinegar to be able to digest them and process the minerals better.
Totally.
Yeah.
So yeah, like eggs and lentils, grass-fed meat. Bone broth is one of my favorite ways to get like a lot of these.
Bone broth is like one of the most universal, cross-cultural, all over the world, throughout history, pregnant people are drinking bone broth,
Mhm.
often with some warming spices
Totally.
to increase circulation. And again, with that warming, like anytime that you're increasing circulation in the body, you are increasing the communication between your body, the oxygen and the attention that your blood flow is able to bring the whole body system is really important. So staying warm, again, the before, during, and after, it's not
Totally.
just like the acute moment, but like making sure that your body is staying warm by the way that you're dressing and the foods that you're taking in. And a lot of traditional cultures also say nothing cold should come near your body, in your body, on your body. Do not drink iced or frozen things. But then I'm like, okay, ice cream is so good.
Yeah.
Just, I want to throw that out there, not as like a hard, fast rule, but as a suggestion of being really conscious that your food be at minimum room temperature, but ideally warm. Because when you eat food that is not already warm, it's taking more energy to then warm it up to digest it. And you want that energy available for your uterus and your hormones to get right. You don't want it to be distracted in your digestive system.
Totally.
Yeah.
That was what I wanted to make sure to say.
Yay.
We could literally go on.
We could literally go on forever
2
and
more
ever.
days.
I'm really impressed that we're only 20 minutes after right now.
That's pretty good.
And I just want to say, that there's a ritual outline also in the book and in the course, and that I always recommend that people look into their own lineage first, of like, what is the pregnancy and what is the grief ritual of your own lineage, and that there is something there. And if you can't find it, you're not digging deep enough. And that elemental magic is really my go-to for most things, but particularly pregnancy release, to choose one or more of the elements to support you with the transformation, and to do some kind of a ritual where you have the support of the earth, the support of fire, of wind, of water, because they're amazing allies in the alchemy and the transformation that needs to happen. Again, not just with our hormones, not just with our tissues, but that there are also energetic and psycho-spiritual implications to this process that deserve care and support and witnessing. And that's like another differing narrative that I find myself from the mainstream feminist pro-choice narratives of like, it's just a medical procedure.
Totally. Yeah.
It's just between a woman and her doctor. And we're like, okay, that's not trans inclusive. And that's still like validating the external authority of the doctor. And it's like, we actually don't need medical attention for most of these processes related to the womb. And that is statistically proven. Like very, very few of these processes have the infection or the hemorrhage. It's less than 5% have those type of complications where we actually need medical attention. We're talking about over 90% of folks being able to resolve a pregnancy safely and effectively at home. And yes. And so I feel like we could go on forever, but I'm ready to, I'm gonna look through some of the questions I got on the Instagrams.
Cool. That's
Are we good? I feel like sticking around and if you have here,
about
measurement amount of nervine tonic.
Gosh, at this point I just kind of like eyeball things.
It's like a tablespoon per quart usually. Is that right?
I tend to do a little more than
Me
that.
too.
Like if you were doing something like this, I feel like the bottom, like a good, I don't know, thumb amount, and that's pretty strong, but that's assuming that you're going to probably have like a little blend of things. I think like when I worked at an apothecary, we would tell people 1 tablespoon per cup of water. I tend to do a little bit more than that just because I like really strong infusions, but I think that is kind of a good general guideline for folks. And one other thing I wanted to just say really quick is the Colorado Doula Project does a really amazing, very encompassing abortion doula training. They didn't do it last year because of COVID, but they've been working on getting all of the material up so that the whole training can be virtual
Oh, wow.
and accessible to anyone, anywhere.
Mhm.
So that's what they're working on now, and they're thinking it'll probably be released in the spring. In the past, it's always been pay what you can. So yeah, that's definitely something to look out for. And if you want to be an in-person volunteer, like going into the clinics with people, they require that you do their training first as a way to kind of like vet people and make sure you're not some whatever. So yeah, and the best way to be in the loop about that is to follow them on their social media accounts, because that's where they'll announce it first.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that we answer any questions of people who came live before I go into kind of a rapid fire of these Instagram write-in questions. Does anybody else have any big questions that is here still a half hour, 2.5 hours after we started? I should have known. I should have been like 3 hours, 3 hours. Say lovey. We're chilling.
I would just like to know the name of that liniment that you referenced, or if you could type it in the chat so I could like look it up, because I've never heard of that. It just sounds so fantastic.
Do it right here. See, I'm not that tech savvy. I can do this.
You got it.
All right. So it's Zhanggu Shui. There's also another, there's all kinds of things. If something has like menthol in it and arnica or like cayenne, those are all great things. You could even use
St. John's wort topically.
St. John's wort topically.
You said, don't take it orally, but topically it's yummy.
Totally. Or like tiger balm even, or icy hot. Okay, yes, I can do that. Well, if someone else has another question, if you want to answer, or
I'm like, okay. I'm like, if you want to.
Okay.
I think I'm like, that's all also in my book. But
it's true. And to be totally honest, Sam's book is really amazing. I
don't mean to be like selling it, but also like, I don't think you should need to type everything out. And there's going to be a replay. I'm sorry. I'm just like, watch the replay, take notes.
Totally.
Okay. Where can I get them without relying on a doctor? We talked about that. Do they always work? They don't always work, but they work over 80% of the time by themselves with misoprostol, and like 98% of the time with mifepristone. So they generally work. And if they don't work, what's next? You can keep taking misoprostol every week for a few weeks if you wanted to. It really depends on who you are and what your circumstances are. I think trying again with the medication is really reasonable. You can go in and need a suction experience. I've also seen acupuncture be really, acupuncture before, during, and after any type of pregnancy experience, I highly recommend. So yeah, if they don't work, there's a whole bunch of different options, but taking the medication again is one of them too. Yeah,
if someone were to do it through the clinic, they would suggest the next step would be to do a surgical. And
right,
I've had
that's
that
true
before.
Yeah, for sure. They're going to recommend suction. Contraindications and side effects, and I think kidney and liver issues to be some of the main red flags of like, this is not a good option for you. And then similarly, the side effects being hugely related to digestion and kidney and liver function.
Or anybody with like heart conditions or a blood clotting disorder. These are all things that you would know that you had beforehand typically.
We hope. Yeah. Pros and cons of miso combo versus miso only.
The pro is that using mifepristone in addition is going to raise the chances of it being successful.
Yep.
That's really the only difference.
Yeah, more successful with the mifepristone, like very close to 100%.
Yeah.
So like if you can get the mifepristone, get it, take it, would be my general feel. Similarities, differences to herbal abortion. So fascinating because it's the same.
Yeah.
It's a very different process in terms of the speed and the effectiveness. However, when you are working with plants to terminate or expel a pregnancy, your goals are the same. Your
Right.
goals are also to inhibit or block progesterone and to stimulate contractions and move a pregnancy out. And the main difference is that the medications are way more effective.
Yep.
They're just much safer and more effective.
Totally.
Other actions besides terminating a pregnancy, actual mechanisms. I think we covered that enough.
Yeah, I think so too.
Already. I've heard folks say how unprepared they were for the intense, painful sensations at 8+ weeks. What are the maximum weeks for use and different support measures for each week of gestation? So I would refer this person to my course for how I get really specific in terms of tips for support people and age of gestation. And yeah, the being unprepared for the intense sensations, that's just it's a shame of the medical system for the most part. And just like that we all need doula skills. We all need skills to move through labor.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do they do? How long do you bleed after? How much? We talked about that.
We talked about that.
I think we got through most of the questions. If there's anything stream of consciousness you want to go for while I
No,
get
I'm
to
just
the
looking
other
to see
batch.
if anyone else has any more questions. Doesn't look like it right now.
How many days should I plan to take off work? You know, I think take as much time off work as you possibly can.
Totally. Yeah.
As much as you can. I would plan on, again, like ideally like a minimum to 48 to 72 hours of like, this is your job. This is your main job.
Yeah, I find that people more often are like overly ambitious as far as like how when they expect they will be able to go back, and then end up choosing like, you know, okay, actually I do need more time.
Yeah.
But
and I really, really love that, again, with the taking inspiration from global and traditional cultures around what a postpartum period is, and really deeply respecting the fact that regardless of the age of gestation, you were pregnant and you gave birth and now you are postpartum. And that most cultures have a really strict protocol that is, again, mind, body, and spirit nourishing for a postpartum period that is generally 40 days. So even if you're going back to work on day 2 or day 3 after the process, what I recommend is having some kind of really special ritual space, even if it's just like an hour alone in your bedroom, or it's like 20 minutes of brewing some nourishing tea, or sitting at your altar, of something that is really deeply honoring that you are postpartum for 40 days after the process, regardless of your level of pain or bleeding. And that's, again, like not a protocol, it's just a recommendation for really respecting how liminal and tender and vulnerable we are, like both physically and psychically and energetically. And what do you need to nourish and protect yourself during that postpartum phase before you are integrating into fully being an individual? Because while we're pregnant, we're more connected to the all, and it's a different experience. So that process, really, really highly recommending some level of intention and nourishment that is ritualized for 40 days.
Yeah. This is kind of going back to
Do
something,
the
but
pills expire? Yeah.
they do expire. Yes. I mean, there's an expiration date on there, and they seem to work after
they'll
set
get
expiration
they'll
date.
get weaker. I think the FDA expiration, again, for stomach ulcer medication, just to clarify, like there's no like abortion approved protocol or expiration for these medications, but as a stomach ulcer medication, the expiration date is 5 years. And at that 5 years, they don't like spontaneously combust or like lose their efficiency. They just are weaker.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
just, I would never throw them away,
Right.
frankly.
Mhm.
I would want to keep them on hand if you have access to them, which Aid Access has just released a campaign that is like really supporting people ordering them and having them on in their medicine cabinets before they're pregnant. Like, how brilliant.
Yeah.
Like, you should just have it on your medicine cabinet in case you need it, so that you're not panicked when you do need it.
Totally.
So yeah,
I just want to share that I just did that, and it's really awesome because like you literally can just like put in the option, like they're like, why are you getting this? And one of the options is like, I just want to have this, like just in case. And they write back to you and they're like, we're so happy you're doing this. And they're like, but just to also like make it very clear that like they will delay their shipment of it to you because of that answer. And so they're like, we'll send it to you in 2 to 4 weeks. So I just want to like, I just am like screaming on the top of the mountain to let everybody know, don't put that as like a, well, just in case, because you won't get your pills as soon. And like, if you do think that you might be pregnant, like put another option so that you get them sooner. Just saying that.
I'm so glad you did that.
That's great. Really good to know.
So yeah, they'll get weaker after 5 years.
Mhm.
And at that point, again, it's like, you know, the milligrams that you need, and maybe you want to take a half a pill. Again, that's me getting like into murky waters of like recommending things that I shouldn't. But I wouldn't throw them away, I guess, is my bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just quickly wanted to, now that we've gone through all this information, wanted to go back to what I read to you guys that Gina had said, the one of the co-founders of the CDP, about that person who they just had last week. You know, this person flew all the way here from Texas just to receive the pills and was then going to stay in the airport.
In an early pregnancy. Was going to have their abortion at the airport.
So yeah, now that we've gone through like context and what that really looks like, I just wanted to bring it back to make everyone even madder than they already are. So,
but again, and bless Aid Access for their amazing work and getting the word out there that like we all deserve to just have this in our medicine cabinet in case we need it, and we shouldn't have to go asking for permission or through bureaucracy or hierarchy to be able to govern our wombs and manage our fertility as we see fit, and that these medications are really the safest and most effective thing that we have right now for most people. And I also want to say that it's so important that we not lose the art of a pelvic exam and hands-on care and midwifery and doula care and all of those things, and that this self-managed abortion of like, it's a secret, it's in isolation, is really horrifying to me.
Totally.
And that rather than seeing it as like this private thing you do alone, to have it be this loving rite of passage that you do with your dear ones and your beloveds, that is my vision for the use of these tools, and that the tool shouldn't be seen as the savior, right? And that the context that the tool is used is just as important as the effectiveness of the tool.
Totally. Yes.
And I think that's plenty.
I know.
Plenty
I
for now.
Oh, there's so much more.
And there's always more. And always, use your intuition, use your own research skills, like cross-reference, double check the things that we shared are our favorite ideas and some of our own experiences, but there's a lot of other voices and a lot of information out there. This is just one little angle, and your own body, your own womb, your own heart, your own intuition have abundant, amazing wisdom, and that people ought to be accessing that as they navigate their options for pregnancy release as well. That's part of the process, and that the tool is not the savior. The tool is not here to fix you. It's here to assist you in embodying your intention more fully. It's here to assist the communication that you're like, all right, pregnancy, like it's time for an eviction notice. And I am using this tool to communicate something that I am emotionally, mentally, spiritually, fully aligned with and committed to, and how beautiful that I have an effective tool to communicate.
Totally.
Yeah.
That was a really good way to say that.
Yeah. Wow, thanks for everybody that hung out for so long. Any last minute questions or comments? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious if you have any resources for finding images of like what certain clots are and like chorionic villi. Because I know there's like My Beautiful Cervix project. I'm wondering if there's something kind of similar in that arena. I know it's like maybe a more private thing where it's harder to find images, but
The best resource I know of right now, unfortunately, is a religious organization that's like anti-choice. But I will let you, it's called Still Birthday.
Oh yeah.
Is a website online that's actually, I think, like a Christian organization supporting people through stillbirths, but it's some of the most graphic and accurate visuals of pregnancy release at different stages that I've seen. Yeah. And a new view of a woman's body, I think, has really beautiful, but they're black and white. So as far as like actual color images, Still Birthday is the best resource that I know of. And if you find one better, please do let me know. Yeah. And again, with that, just like, it's such a different texture. And with the water, the water trick of does it float or does it sink? Yeah. Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you so much. And again, like, not about the self promo, but about the info promo of that my whole miscarriage and abortion support e-course is available by donation starting tomorrow, and everybody will receive a link to that who is watching this replay. And that is a lot more robust and goes into deep doula skills, pain coping, emotional toolkit, multicultural rituals, and like diagrams of all the different procedures and processes, including herbs and suction and medication. And that I hope that folks take advantage of that resource. It's really an authentic offering and gift from my heart to yours. And thank you so much for being the change. Knowing that these, again, like this physical process is only one dimension, and that really our consciousness around these processes is some of the most powerful alchemy that we can shift as individuals and care providers to change our culture. So I thank everybody who has spent time tuning in with this session, with this info session today, for doing the really uncomfortable work of examining your biases and moving through them and opening your heart and opening your mind and shifting consciousness as an individual and for our collective, because we are fucking doing it. It's happening. It is changing. It is shifting. So blessed be, merry meet and merry part, merry meet again.
Yes.
Yeah, may this ripple out and affect so many people's lives and beauty and healing.
All right, I guess I'll say,
yes.
If anyone wants support with their own health using herbs, I do consultations, so you can find me probably via Sam's Instagram post.
Is Instagram the best way for people to find you right now?
Yeah, I do have a website. It's
You
just,
do?
I made it randomly last minute. It's not like the best thing ever, but whatever. It does the job.
Yeah. Cool.
And
what's your website?
It's just my name, Bonnie McIntosh, and .com wasn't available, so it's .love.
Yay! I'll include that in the follow-up email for everybody for sure. And she's very humble and extremely wise.
I'm blushing right now.
Yeah, she's blushing.
You can't tell.
Yeah. All right. Much love,
Thanks
y'all.
so much.
Thank you so
for
much.
coming. This was great.
Bye. Bye.